Did my dwarves come up short in my very first game of Warhammer The Old World? Stick around to the end to find out. Hey folks, I'm William, this is Runeforged, welcome to the channel. Earlier this week, I played my very first game of Warhammer The Old World, so I can prepare for an upcoming online tournament that begins in less than 2 weeks. In this video, I'll give you a very quick overview of my first game, including some of the mistakes I made and what I might do differently in the future. This was a 2,000 point game with my Dwarven Grand Army versus the new Nuln Empire Army of Infamy. I'll go ahead and put copies of our lists up on the screen for you to look at, but I won't go into them in too much detail, so definitely feel free to pause if you'd like to take a closer look. Also, in the previous video on my channel, I did more of a deep dive into the army list that I used for this game, so definitely go check that out if you are so inclined. And just to set some very clear expectations, this is just going to be a quick, very low effort battle report adjacent video. And while eventually I would like to do some higher production quality kind of things, my main focus right now is just learning how to play the game and preparing for this tournament. So this is really more of just a fun little side project that you can engage with if you want to. I did want to note that this game was played online using warhall.eu, and basically that application can just be set up to take screenshots of the game every couple of minutes, and I'll basically just be going through those screenshots one by one and explaining what's happening during the game. It's definitely not the prettiest thing from an aesthetic standpoint, but it will definitely serve my needs for this video. But before we jump into the game, if you are enjoying this video so far, please consider aiding me in my eternal struggle against the dreaded YouTube algorithm by crushing those like and subscribe buttons so you don't miss out on more awesome old world content like this in the future. All right, so this is kind of what the game looked like after the deployment was done. Overall, I'm not really too sure how I feel about my deployment. I think that what kind of threw me off this game is that I really built this list with the intention that other armies were going to be coming to me. And I think I ran into one of the few lists that, you know, there's really some big questions about who's going to be attacking who here. And I think especially kind of on the Rangers, because they're kind of a mixed unit, hybrid unit that's good at both kind of melee and range combat. For most of this game, I was just really unsure whether or not I should be standing still and shooting, or whether or not I should be trying to rush forward and get into close combat. So that's something that kind of comes up a lot during this game. But kind of looking at the overall situation here, I'm really kind of worried about, you know, what's showing up as the right flank here. My Iron Drakes feel a little bit outclassed by all the stuff over here. And I have the impression at the beginning of the game that I'm really going to have to do a lot of pretty heavy damage during this first turn in order to make that side of the map winnable. And I'm really not exactly sure what's going to happen over on the left side over here. Again, I'm not really sure whether or not my Rangers should be standing still or moving forward. So in terms of kind of some unusual things here, I did scout my Rangers forward a little bit so I could take advantage of this wooded area here. Unfortunately, that meant that I had to leave my heroes out of the unit, at least to start, and try to move them in on the first turn in order to get the benefits from the kind of Runesmith and Battle Standard Bearer that has the Banner of Grugni, which gives that whole unit a 5-up board save, which is going to be really important versus all the shooting that's coming in from the other squad. All right, so that is the deployment done. Moving in here to kind of the first turn. The Nuln detachment has an ability that lets these volley guns move forward as using a Vanguard ability. So they actually started the game about, I think, 3 or 4 inches further forward than they would normally be allowed to do. And this was actually kind of a pain for me to deal with because that now meant that I could not move backwards with my Iron Drakes in order to avoid that volley gun fire. So now my Iron Drakes are kind of stuck in this point where, again, I'm not really sure whether I should be moving forward or should just be standing still and trying to take out these various different volley guns. So that was definitely a problem during that early part of the game. All right, so during my movement phase, I did end up moving my heroes that were over here on this left side down into that unit of Rangers over there, giving them all the buffs that they were supposed to have. One notable exception to that is I did end up putting Burlock over in this unit of Iron Drakes when he was originally planned to go in the unit of Rangers, because I wanted to keep him close to the War Machines so that he could take advantage of the re-rolling of the artillery dice once a turn. Ultimately, it really didn't come into play during this game, but that was my kind of thought process going in. So during my first round of shooting, it was actually pretty bad. The Rangers did manage to pick up 2 of the Outriders down here on the left side, but other than that, I didn't do a single point of damage with any of my other shooting, which was really, really disappointing. All right, on my opponent's turn, he moved up his engineers on war wagons up into the midfield. And he also ended up using one of his Hochland long rifles on the war wagons to deal a wound to Burlock. Now, I was not aware prior to the game of what that he even had Hochland long rifles. I didn't really know. Actually, he probably did tell me, and I just didn't process what they did. But this actually puts Burlock, who is my army's general, in a lot of danger. So I think my thought process at this point is that next turn I'm going to have to try to move him out of this unit as quickly as possible and maybe get him back within 3 inches of the war machine so he can make use of his special ability that lets him not be targeted by shooting as long as he is within 3 inches of a war machine unit. So that is the plan for right now. Unfortunately, the rest of the shooting in his army does a lot of work on my Iron Drakes here in the middle of the field. I think especially this volley gun on the right-hand side did a ton of damage. And I ended up losing pretty much this entire unit of Iron Drakes here on the right side. And literally the only thing that's left in that unit is Burlock with only 1 wound remaining. And then also my my Thane with the handgun and a bunch of the cool ranged engineering runes that makes him kind of a threat. But unfortunately, that unit has just pretty much been wiped off the map. The other volley gun on the other side does kill 4 of the rangers in that big ranger unit. Really not as bad as I thought it was going to be. So that unit is doing pretty well for now, largely as a result of the cover that they are in because of the woods. And then also the ward save that the battle standard bearer is giving to that whole unit. All right, so what's next here? Yep, so in my next turn, I do end up moving Burlock out of coherency with the Thane that was also in that unit and moving him, try to get him back to the war machines. So right now he is not the closest target, so he cannot be targeted by normal missile fire. And if I can get him within 3 inches of that grudge thrower, he can't be targeted by shooting at all, which is kind of my goal right now. All right. So next we see that the war wagon on this right side, actually I think there might be a screenshot missing here, but during my turn I moved my king out of the unit of rangers over here and also did a ton of shooting damage to this unit of outriders here in the lower left. You can see I took out quite a few of those during my last turn. I also managed to take out one of the volley guns with my stone thrower, so good job on that. And I also managed to do 2 wounds to this volley gun over here, which I think was done by the Iron Drake champion with that troll hammer torpedo. So he also did a very good job inflicting some damage on that. I think that also during that turn, my Thane with the handgun also managed to take out several of the Empire gunners here in the middle of the field, which was pretty good. So definitely a much better turn of shooting for me during the last turn. But fast forwarding to my opponent's turn, he did charge my handgun Thane with his war wagon, which was pretty dangerous for me. And then he's also threatening a charge over here on my king. So let's see what happens in this next photo. He does end up moving these outriders on the left-hand side back behind his cannons so that they are no longer a prime target for shooting. He also charges into my king over here with his war wagon, doing some damage there. And it looks like he also repositions these outriders over here on the right flank. All right, let's go forward. And it looks like during his shooting phase, he does manage to kill 2 rangers, as well as one of the Iron Drakes over here, and actually causes them to run away. I think I was actually like 10.1 inches away from Burlock here, my general, so I could not use his leadership to prevent this panic. And unfortunately, I was just a little bit out of range. So that's something I'm going to have to be a little bit more conscious of in my next game, but not too bad. All right. And then in his shooting phase, I think these outriders end up taking out Burlock because he can't quite make it within 3 inches of that grudge thrower that would give him the protection against shooting. And then he also manages to take out one of my stone throwers with a very lucky cannon shot over the hill here. When I originally deployed my grudge throwers, I was under the impression that cannons would not be able to hit them if they were outside of line of sight, but I guess that is not the case. In retrospect, if I had known that, I probably would have just put both of my grudge throwers on the hill and not had to worry too much about trying to fire indirectly, which actually did cost me a kill on this volley gun a lot earlier in the game. So lessons learned for next time. All right, what else do we have that happened here? All right, just that. And then it looks like during the close combat phase, My Thane, I think, ended up losing this combat by 1. He didn't take any wounds, but I think this unit is close order or something, and he ended up falling back in good order. And then over here with my King against the War Wagon, I did end up taking an additional wound. But in that close combat phase, I also got to strike back, and my King did a whopping 6 wounds to this War Wagon, putting it just on 2 wounds remaining. So I definitely won that combat there. And it looks like the War Wagon, I think the War Wagon fell back in good order here. And I did do a pursuit move here. And the good thing was that this was on his turn. So that actually opens me up for a pretty juicy charge here at the beginning of my next turn, which is very exciting. All right. Looks like next we've got the Iron Drakes rallied during my turn, which is very nice. And my King was able to charge into this cannon and hopefully be able to do some work. I also ended up wheeling my big Ranger unit just a little bit here so that I get kind of better arcs of fire, and also hopefully try to refuse this, this right flank over here on future turns. Because I am very worried about this War Wagon or these Outriders eventually getting into my flank over here. And that's something that I need to be thinking about now as opposed to a couple turns from now. All right. So also during my phase, it looks like I was able to pick up these 2 handgunners here. I think those are my Rangers who ended up finishing those off. So that's some points scored for me. And then my King in close combat also managed to completely destroy that cannon. And I believe he ended up following up into the Engineer down here, which is very good. But unfortunately, my my handgun Thane in the upper right was taken out by this War Wagon. So that's a little bit unfortunate. And yes, it does look like I was able to follow up into the Engineer. And then I think on my opponent's turn, he ended up charging me with his War Wagon. So we'll have to see how that goes. All right, moving on to the next part of the game. It looks like he was able to take out one of my Iron Drakes up here with some shooting, and it was able to turn that War Wagon. I think he actually ended up shooting it with the War Wagon, and now the War Wagon will be coming at my flank over here. So that's something that I am very worried about. As far as the close combat goes, I don't know if we see anything happening over there. Okay, here's the close combat stuff. So it looks like he was able to do 3 additional wounds to me, I think mostly with his War Wagon here against my King, which is not great, which means he's down to his last wound over here. And then, but fortunately for me, it looks like I was able to destroy the War Wagon, which caused the Engineer to break from that fight as well. So he ran directly away from my King here, and I was able to follow up or pursue, or whatever the terminology is, into this very weakened unit of Outriders here. So that is very lucky for me, which means I'm not going to be able to get shot this turn. I also do, I can't remember what the actual name of this maneuver is called, but it's the one where you maneuver up to 90 degrees about your center. But unfortunately, I think this actually was an illegal move in retrospect, because after rereading the rules last night, I don't think that any one model is allowed to move more than double their movement characteristic, which would be 6, or which would be 3 and then double to be 6. So I think that a lot of my guys actually moved way more than 6 inches here. So I don't think that was legal. Fortunately, I don't think that that had much of an impact on the game, because we ended shortly after this, but that is just something that I need to be aware of for next time. That's not a legal move. And it also does kind of bring into perspective, like, as good on paper as having these kind of long lines are, because I can fire most of my guys. If I get in close combat, like, all those guys are attacking with their melee weapon. But in practicality, these like really long lines of units are pretty unwieldy to maneuver on the battlefield, especially when you have really low movement like the Dwarves do. So this is something that I'm going to have to think about for future games. I may need to either think about taking units with smaller frontages, or try to figure out something to deal with this kind of awkward and unwieldy nature of this really long unit. So yeah. All right. Moving on. It looks like during my close combat phase, I was able to take out the last of the Outriders down here in the lower left with my King, which is fantastic. He's been doing a ton of work for me this game, so that is nice to see. And then in my opponent's turn, it looks like the War Wagon over here charged into my last remaining Iron Drake, and it looks like I fled away from that so that I wouldn't have that unit being completely destroyed. And it also opens me up to shoot this War Wagon in my next turn. Unfortunately, I think my opponent had to go at this point, so we did end up wrapping up at the end of the 5th turn of the game. We didn't end up playing out anymore. But this, I think this is kind of the end state of the game, more or less. The last important thing that happened was that at the end of his 5th turn, or during the shooting phase of his 5th turn, he was able to pivot that cannon around and grape shot my king, taking off the last wound, which is a little bit unfortunate, but the king did a lot of work for me this game, so I can't be too upset. So this is kind of the ending screenshot of the game. And I think before we ended up tallying at the points, I think that there was kind of a general consensus that I had lost by a pretty considerable margin. But actually, after we ended up totaling everything up, it was actually a really, really close game, with my opponent scoring 1,027 victory points and me scoring 1,004 victory points. And because you need at least 100 points over your opponent in order for it to be considered a win, this game actually ended in a draw. So you're welcome to look at the screen and see what all was destroyed on both sides of the battle. All right, so now I think I'm just going to go through my list really quick and just kind of give my thoughts on how that particular unit did during the game, and maybe talk a little bit about what I might do differently next time. So as for Burlock here, unfortunately, he was a little bit disappointing. Now, he was kind of put in kind of a weird situation this game. I had kind of originally planned to put him in that unit of Rangers where he'd probably be a little bit more safe. But kind of just because of the weird way that the deployment worked out, I felt like I really should put him in the Iron Drakes because they were closer to the Grudge Throwers, so he could use his reroll artillery dice once a turn on the Grudge Throwers. So he didn't really get put in the best position here, but unfortunately he didn't really perform all that well either. I'm not really sure that he actually contributed anything to the game. Even his ability that lets the unit he's in avoid the -1 penalty for shooting at long range, I don't actually think that came into effect at all during this game. So for this particular instance, he was kind of a waste of points. And also the decision to make him my general did not play out at all like I had originally intended it to. And now I'm kind of rethinking that strategy altogether. I think making the king the general also would probably actually make more sense. And I know in this particular game, the king ended up dying as well. But he is significantly more tanky than Burlock, and I just trust him to stay alive more than the 2 wounds, a relatively low armor save that Burlock has. So as of right now, not feeling too good about Burlock. Also, before I go on, I just want to acknowledge, like, this is just one game. I still know very, very little about the game overall, and very, very small sample size. So it's possible that Burlock is a great character. He just didn't perform well this game. But based specifically on the information that I have after this one game, not feeling super good about Burlock right now. As for the king was an absolute beast during this game. He ended up picking up a war wagon, a cannon, and I think he probably got something else as well. And he finished off that unit of Outriders in the bottom left. So he actually probably overperformed. So I feel pretty good about the king for this game. Now, I do have to acknowledge I probably did get a little bit lucky because I got a very, very fortunate string of events where I was able to charge in the war wagon and then overrun and follow up. And I kept getting into combat after combat after combat. Whereas, that's probably not going to happen consistently every game. But I do feel really good about the king overall. I will say, as I alluded to kind of earlier in the video, he did kind of get planked down a little bit by some like low strength, low armor penetration wounds over the course of the game, which is going to happen because as a result of his Rune of Preservation, he's immune to Killing Blow and immune to multiple wounds. So a lot of times he is just going to take 1 wound at a time until he is ultimately defeated. So with that in mind, I might make some changes to how I have his runes set up, especially if I end up taking him as a Royal Clans King, which gives him an additional 25 points of runic items. I think I might end up dropping the Rune of Warding and replacing that with a Master Rune of Gromril, which would give him a 2-up base armor save. And I think that actually would have saved his life during the course of this particular game. So that's something that I'm thinking about for the future. All right, next I've got the Runesmith. Again, the Runesmith didn't really get a chance to do very much in this game, but that's largely because his primary function is just to help me counter enemy magic. And my opponent in this game didn't have any wizards, so he really was not able to fulfill his core function. But overall, I do think that I still need to have some level of anti-magic in the list in order to protect against other lists that do have a lot more magic in them. So I think he's going to be returning for our next game. Or alternatively, I might replace him with an Anvil of Doom, but regardless, there is going to still be some anti-magic in my list for my next game. Next, we've got the Thane on Shield Bearers, who is also the Battle Standard Bearer. Even though this guy is pretty expensive point-wise at 321, I do think that the Master Rune of Grugni, which gave me the 5-up invulnerability save, did a lot of work during this game. And if I hadn't had him, it's very possible that that unit of Rangers might have been destroyed or not as effective as it otherwise was. Unfortunately, I did not get a chance to test out the quality or the capabilities of the Rune of Fear. I just never came up during the game. That is something that I want to check out for future games, because I think there's potential for that rune to be good, but I'm not sure yet, so we'll have to test it out some more. Also, the Rune of Battle didn't come up during this game because I never got into close combat, and the Rune of Speed didn't matter that much either. But overall, I still feel pretty good about this Thane, mostly just because the Master Rune of Grugni feels very, very good. Next, they've got the Thane with the handgun, as well as the classic trio of Master Rune of Bursting Flame, Rune of Accuracy, and Rune of Rapid Fire. Basically, that means I'm getting 2 shots a turn. I'm always hitting on 3s because I'm ignoring all of the negative modifiers for shooting. And then each hit that I get with that guy actually turns into 2d3 hits as a result of the Master Rune of Bursting Flame. Now, again, in this particular game, he wasn't able to do too much. The unit that he was in got wiped out very, very quickly due to overwhelming firepower from the Empire player. So even though he wasn't able to perform super well in this game, he was able to pick off a few kills on the Empire handgun regiment, which ultimately ended up in that unit being destroyed. So I did get a few points as a result of work that he did. Overall, I'm pretty neutral on the handgun Thane right now. I think that he could be good, and I'll consider taking him on my next list, but I may also end up dropping him for something else. We'll have to wait and see. So next we've got this massive 31 stack of Rangers. And again, I'm pretty neutral on this unit. I think it's another example of something that looks very good on paper, and I feel like it probably could be in the right circumstance. But during the course of this game, I found them to be fairly mediocre. They did some good work on the Outriders in the bottom left, and they were able to finish off the unit of handgunners in the center of the board, which I do appreciate. So they did score me some points without giving up any points. So that is something worth mentioning. But I also found that the really long line was pretty awkward and unwieldy in practice in the game. And you saw towards the end there, I even made like an illegal move because of just how crazy long that unit is. You can't actually pivot that far, considering that rule that won't ever let you move more than double the move characteristic of any one model. So I've really got to think about how I want to incorporate long lines of troops into my armies moving forward. So I'm not really sure how the Ranger unit turned out. I guess I'm pretty neutral on that. Next, we have the Grudge Throwers, and unfortunately, the Grudge Throwers weren't able to do a lot of work for me this game. They did pick up one volley gun, which was really nice, and that was actually probably pretty pivotal in having as good of an outcome as I got during this game. But unfortunately, the loss of Burlock pretty early in the game meant that I lost out on those artillery dice rerolls once a turn. And basically, as soon as Burlock went down, I think it was like the next turn or the turn after, I basically got back-to-back misfires on my remaining Stone Thrower, and it was not able to do anything for the rest of the game. So not ideal. I think that if I end up taking more Grudge Throwers in the future, I'm going to have to be much more careful about making sure that Burlock or some engineer is either nearby, or I may just drop the engineer and put some runes of forging on them so that I can have built-in rerolls on that unit. And lastly, we had the Iron Drakes. Unfortunately, I think the Iron Drakes were pretty mediocre this game as well. I think I only got one hit with the Iron Drakes the entire game, and it was one of the torpedoes. It did okay. I think it did 2 wounds to one of the volley guns, which is okay, but they definitely did not justify their points cost this game. Again, with the caveat that they were the primary target for my enemy in the first turn of combat, and they pretty much just got completely melted before they were able to do anything too significant. That said, I do feel like Iron Drakes are pretty strong, and they just kind of got unlucky during this game. so I will probably be taking more of them in my next game. But I do think that I will probably take them in one larger unit as opposed to taking them in kind of multiple smaller units. So we'll see how that works out. So did my dwarves come up short in my very first game of the old world? No, I don't think they did. I actually feel really good about this game, especially considering that it was my first one. I definitely made some mistakes, both piloting and rules-wise, but I think I learned quite a bit. My opponent was also really nice and very patient while I was trying to learn the rules, and I very much appreciated that level of sportsmanship. I do plan on getting at least one more game in this week, and I'm hoping to cover that game just like I did this one, but hopefully a little bit less rough around the edges. And when that video is ready, there should be a link to view that video either somewhere on your screen or down in the description. So definitely check that out if you are so inclined. As you've probably seen throughout the course of the video, very, very new to the old world, and I would obviously very much appreciate any help or tips that you could provide to help me become a better player. The only thing I ask is that if you do spot a correction to one of the rules or something I say, I would ask that you provide the book and page number where you are getting your information from so that I can reference that on my own time. But yeah, I think that's about it for now. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye.